It is the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for joining today's webinar, How to Improve Microsoft 365 Records Management. We appreciate you guys joining us today, and the first thing I'd like to do is just take a second to introduce our speakers. My name is Shayna Horka, and I am the Product Marketing Manager here at Gimmal. I'm joined by our key speaker today, Gimmal's Director of Sales Engineering, Dean Misenhimer. Now, before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen, and we're going to answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. There will be at least one poll question, so please keep an eye out for that. You will see it pop up on your screen. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. All right, so to kick things off, I have just a couple of slides here to tell you a little bit about Gimmal and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Founded in 2002, Gimmal is a records, information management, and governance software company that helps you balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, quickly respond to data requests, or comply with policies across multiple sources, Gimmal can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with our key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimmal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include records management, content governance for SharePoint, document management for SAP solutions, and Altitude, a file analysis solution. Now to dive just a little deeper into how Gimmal helps you balance the value and risk of your information. We do this in two ways, by helping you discover and govern information. But for the purpose of this webinar, we'll focus on governing. We help you achieve a unified view across all systems and manage the full life cycle of information from a central location. Our solutions put policy on your information where it already exists, so you know that it is retained and disposed of in a compliant manner. Our products often result in large cost savings through optimizing and leveraging infrastructure you may already own, such as Microsoft 365. But now I'll go ahead and hand it over to Dean so he can begin the presentation.
Thank you, Shayna. So the title of our webinar today is How to Improve Microsoft 365 Records Management. And Gimmal and Microsoft have a long history of collaboration with one another, over 18 years. Gimmal's first software product 10 years ago was a records management extension for SharePoint on-premise that actually brought SharePoint on-prem up to the level of DoD certification, right? The first product in the market to do that. And we've really been focused throughout our 18-year history around information governance and things like risk mitigation, ensured information compliance, full lifecycle management, improved collaboration and consistency across the enterprise. And a lot of that work and doing it has been on the Microsoft platform and helping clients deploy Microsoft in a fashion that they can get the most value out of the platform. And that collaboration has continued most recently with the announcement of SharePoint Syntex. If you didn't see the announcement earlier this week, there's a link to the press release on the Gimmal website you can take a look at. But Syntex is the first product out of Project Cortex that Microsoft has been talking a lot about. Syntex is the first product that really uses advanced AI and machine learning to amplify human expertise, automate content processing, and transform content into knowledge, make that content more usable and more valuable. Gimmal is a preferred partner in the Microsoft Content Services Partner Program. And so Gimmal is in a position to help clients develop and deploy solutions around Project Syntex. So that collaboration with Microsoft continues onward. And the reason that's important, right? You can look across the industry, you can look across your organization. companies have standardized on Microsoft 365 as their cloud platform. Just the amount of services that Microsoft 365 provides across the platform is staggering. And Microsoft, as you see with Syntex and with Project Cortex, continues to invest in that platform and push the boundaries of what it can do and what it can deliver. In addition to SharePoint, which everyone's familiar with for content management, there's content creation tools, collaboration tools, process management tools, business analytics tools, right? There's a variety of different capabilities in the platform that can be leveraged, and it's all about harnessing your investment and getting the maximum out of that platform. And our focus today is really around records management, and that's part of the platform as well with Security and Compliance Center in Microsoft 365. And so that's what we're going to talk about is how do you harness your investment and really get the most out of the platform. So before we do that, we're going to kick it off with a poll. Are you using Microsoft 365 as a records management solution today? Yes, you're using it with Microsoft's built-in features. Yes, but you have a third-party product to enhance the capabilities of Microsoft. No, you've got a separate records management repository. Or no, we don't manage records at all. So pick which option is the best answer for your organization. We'll take a minute. We'll let all the votes be tabulated. Indira and Shane are furiously counting in the background. And we'll show you the results before we move on with the webinar. Because it's always nice to get some audience feedback. And I like to do the polls up front, kind of get everybody engaged. And we'll use this data as we go through the rest of the webinar. And so here's the results. 27% using Microsoft's built-in features. 50% actually have a totally separate records management repository, which is interesting. So some good statistics. We'll capture those, and those will be shared as we send information out after the webinar. But let's go ahead and move forward now with the meat of the presentation. So let's start with talking about retention labels. If you've used Microsoft 365, your organization may or may not be using labels. Well, retention labels in Microsoft 365 are part of the Compliance Center. And what a retention label allows you to do is to put a specific retention policy on a specific item, typically a document, right? If you look on the right, the shot of the dashboard there, I've created 5 different retention labels to kind of show the security protection I want to apply to documents in my organization. They may or may not have retention associated to them. That's optional. But I can mark things internal, protected, and so forth. A retention label gets assigned to a specific item, and the label will travel with that item if it gets moved from site to site. That's different from a retention policy, which is similar yet different. A retention policy applies to an entire site and everything within the site. And we're really going to focus on retention labels today. When the labels are created, they can be applied manually. So when I put a document into a library, I can fill in the metadata column for label and pick the label. And if you're using an E3 or a G3 license with Microsoft 365, that's kind of your option. If you're using an E5 or a G5 license, or if you've purchased the additional E5 compliance add-on, if you're an E3 user, labels can be applied automatically. So again, Microsoft can use the artificial intelligence capabilities and look to automatically apply label based on rules that you can define. And these labels are created through the Compliance Center in Microsoft 365 administration. And so that kind of takes us to one of the first challenges, right? The Compliance Center is not designed with records managers in mind. It looks more like an administration interface because that's where it's surfaced. It lacks intuitiveness and easy navigation, in my opinion. There's a lot of permissions that have to be configured to give somebody the rights to be able to kind of do everything they might need to do. Just to get the screenshot yesterday, I had to go back and give myself some more permissions because I couldn't view the results of certain label activities even though I created them. And then there's latency. When I create a label, it can take up to 7 days for that label to actually appear and be usable across my tenant. And that's a long time. And then when I create a label, if I do want to assign retention to it, there's limited actions that I can take. I can delete something, I can trigger a review, or I can do nothing. You can only take a single action, and those are really the only choices. So this is one of the areas that Gimmal Records Management can extend the capabilities and enhance what Microsoft 365 delivers. Our lifecycle editor is designed with a records manager in mind. It's very intuitive. I can create very descriptive names on my retention lifecycles. It's an intuitive UI. Everything's pull-down menus. I can create my own lifecycle triggers to trigger retention based on any number of different options, so they can be event-based. So the example I always like to use, Shana goes out over the weekend, buys a lotto ticket, wins the lotto, comes in on Monday, says, early retirement. Now we're going to terminate Shana, right? That's an example of event-based retention. I don't know when it's going to happen, but when it does, my retention needs to begin. Other examples are things like retirement of an asset or other things. Could be date-based, and not just created date or last modified date. Could be any date column that you have associated to your content. Maybe it's policy expiration date or contract end date. When that date is hit, now I want to trigger retention. Or maybe it's rule-based. I can look at any metadata property. I can look at any location-based information, and I can look at the value of the retention label and trigger retention based on that, or trigger record classification based on that. And then my life cycles can have multiple phases, or they can have alternate phases. So maybe I want to go through a situation where I'm going to wait until a document is superseded. When that happens, I'm then going to begin retention. I'm going to wait 3 years, and then I'm going to delete the record. And if I change a life cycle, if I were to change the retention period, for example, the expiration date on all my records is immediately recalculated, and that change takes effect immediately. Next is in-place records management, and we'll talk a little bit about what in-place records management really means. Well, look around your organization. Records exist everywhere. Everything, unfortunately, is not in Microsoft 365. Content exists everywhere. A lot of it may be in Microsoft 365, but you might have legacy SharePoint environments out there also. You've got file shares. Could be using modern tools like Box, or you may have legacy ECM out there that is embedded in some critical business processes and not necessarily easy just to take offline. Right? In a perfect world, you'd move everything to Microsoft 365 and life would be wonderful. But it's not a perfect world, unfortunately. Right? Content is everywhere, and migrations are expensive and they take time. Think about your file shares, for example. If you have 10 terabytes of information out on a file share or multiple file shares, and that's probably on the low end for some people, do you even know what's out there, number one? Right? Do you know what the information is there? How organized is it? If you just take that and pick it up and dump it in Microsoft 365, you've basically taken your junk drawer and moved it to the cloud. And now you have a cloud-based junk drawer. You need to do analytics. You need to do cleanup. You need to do rot, get rid of rot. You need to do that type of analytics before you do the migration. And the picture kind of sums it all up, right? There's physical records. What do we do about those? And I'll let this picture just speak for itself. Well, Gimmal Records Management is an in-place records management solution. We can use connectors to reach into respective content repositories. SharePoint Online is one of those. Crawl, classify, and put policy on content in SharePoint Online, but also at the same time, do it for SharePoint on-premise, or do it for network file shares, do it for physical records, for Box, for FileNet, for Documentum. Any combination of content sources you may have, you have one solution that can reach out and put consistent policy across all of those different content sources. And so what I wind up having is one view of all of my records. Because I can't necessarily migrate everything overnight and get it all into one place very easily, it gives me a path to doing migration over the course of time. It lets me take low value content and just let it live it out its life where it's at, put my high value content into Microsoft 365 that I really want to take advantage of. And I've got one view of all that information. This is a screenshot of the managed screen in Gimmal Records Management. I can have a list-based view, or I can view it by the file plan and actually navigate down to specific record classes and view the records for that record class. And those records can be anywhere. In this one view, you can see in the middle, I've got SharePoint Online records. At the top, I've got records sitting in the file share. I've got physical records being managed. I've got one view of all my records, and at a glance, I can see where those records are. I can see what record class the record is assigned to. And on the right, there's a link to where that record is actually located. If a record is on a legal hold, there's a little visual indicator, the little gavel, tells me, oh, this record's on a legal hold. If a record has been declared by Gimmal Records Management, meaning we've locked it in its respective repository where it can no longer be edited or deleted, I'll see a little visual log. So the user interface is designed for a records manager to give me the information that I need. And when I say there's a link to where the record is, if I hover over one of those links, I'll see the URL where the record is at rest in SharePoint Online, in Box, on the file system, right? I'll see exactly where that record is. We do not make copies of your records and put them in the cloud or put them into a data lake, right? That's not in place if I'm putting copies somewhere else and managing them there. Because one, now there's a redundant copy, and two, over time, as the number of records you're managing grows, you're paying for that storage and your costs will increase. Records are managed in place, holds are applied in place, record locking is done in place, and when the record is ultimately dispositioned, it's done in place. So let's talk about record disposition, right, and what that means. So we'll start with a definition. I thought this was a good one. Records disposition is the final action taken in the record's life cycle. So at the end of the life cycle, I'm going to disposition the record. That may include, and probably most typical, it's destruction of the record. But it could also be transfer of the record to another entity like a state archive or a federal archive like NARA, depending on the country you're in, for more permanent preservation. Or it could just be marking the record as permanent in the repository that it's in so that it can't be deleted, right? But it's the last stage of that life cycle, and you can see our model on the right there is very happy because records are being dispositioned and destroyed. And it's always quite surprising how many clients we've talked to that have a records management program, have retention placed on records, have records assigned to record classes, but they never dispose of anything, right? Well, record disposition in Microsoft 365, again, may be perfectly fine for what you need. It may meet your basic requirements if your retention and disposition requirements are fairly basic. There's a few options, as we talked about earlier, out of the box. I can delete a record, I can trigger a review of a record, or I can do nothing. That's kind of my choices. And I can only do one of those things. I can't combine those actions into a more complex disposition lifecycle. And then it's a single step review. So if I trigger a review, there's a field where I can just enter email distribution lists or specific email addresses, and users get notified, right? So it's just a broad notification, and it's per record, which could be a little overwhelming. Well, Gimmal Records Management gives you a managed disposition process. Again, because I might have records in multiple locations, I want to have one view of the records that are eligible for disposition. And I want to be able to have that multi-phase retention. So as a record moves through its various stages, at a point in time, I want to lock the record down and then trigger retention and keep it for 5 years. So nobody can edit it, nobody can change it, nobody can delete it. We keep it for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, we trigger dispose and delete, but I need people to approve it before it's actually destroyed because, we want that review process. I may want to have multiple actions for disposition. Disposition doesn't just mean destroy it. It may mean transfer the record. I need to send it to NARA, or I need to send it to a state archive, or whatever your requirement may be. I may need to dispose of it, but when I dispose of it, where does it go? File shares, SharePoint, SharePoint Online, Box, other systems have recycle bins or trash cans. So when I delete a record, dispose of a record, does it go to the recycle bin and sit there for another 90 days? No, we may want to bypass the recycle bin. So I can configure disposition actions that can either be dispose and recycle, send it to the recycle bin, or more commonly, dispose and delete and completely bypass the recycle bin. Or as I mentioned, maybe we mark the record as permanent in the repository it's in, so it stays there. Or maybe we combine it, we do a transfer, put a copy of the record out for transfer, and then we dispose of it from the repository. And then I want to confirm disposition as part of the process, right? I can choose some disposition life cycles. Maybe I don't have approvals because it's low value content and it just gets disposed of. Other content, I need confirmation. And I want to do bulk processing. If I have 100 records or 1,000 records that have suddenly appeared, think of quarter end or year end. How many records could I have suddenly show up that are now all eligible for disposition? And I really got to do it one at a time. So I'd like to be able to do bulk processing of records. Or we'll go back and use the example of Shana. When Shana retires, we're going to disposition all of her employee records after 7 years. I want to collect those into a case, so now I can just disposition the entire case with a single action. I can trigger retention on the case with a single action. Right? So I can do that bulk processing. And I can set up multi-step approvals. So I may want to have a multi-step approval where when a record's eligible for disposition for HR, for example, I have a group defined as HR record approvers. And I have Indira and Shana both in that group. And so when the record's eligible for disposition, it goes to them. When one of them approves it, now it goes to the second step in the review process, such as records managers. And one of the records managers has to approve it. Now I've got a two-step disposition before the record is actually destroyed. And then once it's destroyed, what happens? Does it just disappear? I may want to have an archive, not a copy of the record, but a copy of data about the record, what was destroyed, a basic set of properties, when it was deleted, where it was at, what record class it was in. And I may want to have destruction certificates for defensible disposition. To kind of give you an example, Brigham Young University, well-known name, a familiar name to a lot of you, is a Gimmal records management client. So the challenge that they had was they had a paper-based records management solution. Classification was all manual. It was done by users. As you can imagine, that generated a lot of compliance concerns. Information wasn't being managed properly. The cost of storage and management was high. And so they turned to Gimmal Records Management because they wanted to leverage their existing SharePoint environment to manage records. So they were able to get information into SharePoint, begin doing automated record classification and tagging of records, automatically apply the life cycle, and then create a streamlined approval process for the disposition like we just talked about. And the outcome for Brigham Young was they avoided the high cost of migration by, one, content that was already in SharePoint. They didn't have to pick it up and move it to a centralized record center. Because when you do that, it kind of destroys the user experience. Your users expect their content where it was at, where they put it, right? Or where it got moved as part of a business process, not locked away in a record center where they can't get to it. So they had a single dashboard with Gimmal Records Management to see all of their information across all of their SharePoint sites. And they were able to simplify the user's daily tasks, such as just information got put into SharePoint, it was classified, policy was put on it. And their records managers could then easily manage things like legal holds, as well as the transfer of historical records. Want to know more? Check out our blogs. There's a couple of great blogs out there that were both written by Chris Kaplinger, the Gimmal's president and chief strategy officer, a pretty well-known name in the industry. And He wrote one blog on just improving retention labels and another around improving records disposition, and that's a lot of the impetus for the webinar that we had today. So you go out and take a look at the blogs, and feel free to comment and add information. And so we're going to hit our last simple poll question here. If you'd like to see a live demonstration of Gimmal records management, I showed screenshots today. If you'd like to see a live demo, how this works, how it's configured, click yes. If you don't want to see one at this time, just click not at this time, and we'll follow up with you for some time in the future. Let us know if you'd like to see something live. There's also other recorded assets that we can send to you down the road if you're interested. And you can get an idea of, quite frankly, how easy it is to configure this, to set it up, and actually automate your records management policy. And so while we're wrapping up the poll questions, Shana, do you want to go ahead and maybe start in on some of the questions? I see we have a few questions in the Q&A in the chat panel.
Yep. So let's start with the first question. Hopefully we can be respectful of time. I have a couple minutes. The first one from the chat box is, you mentioned that when label criteria changes, such as retention or event, those changes are applied to all content that had that label selected. Does Microsoft 365 also allow this? I've been wondering if there's an easy way with Microsoft 365 to ensure label changes are easily applied to all content.
That's one of the other challenges, is modifying a label after you create it, or deleting a label after you've created it. They're pretty persistent. You know, in Gimmal, I have the option with the lifecycle. If I want to change how retention is triggered, you know, I can simply change the trigger I'm using. Or if I'm using events, I just create the event instance at the right time. Or if I change the retention period, when I save that, you know, Gimmal will automatically recalculate the expiration date on all the records that it's managing, and then push the appropriate policy out to the record. So that's one of the other things I would say that's challenging with the Microsoft 365 approach, is labels are relatively difficult to kind of modify and change once they've been created.
And the next one, is there a way with Gimmal or Microsoft 365 for users to flag content for a records manager to review and apply the appropriate label?
Yeah, that could be done. You know, there's a number of ways that could be done. Part of that gets into what your business process would be, but kind of off the top of my head, a simple way might just be a certain metadata flag that is a yes/no review. If I click and say review, that may classify it a certain way in Gimmal, where the records manager has a certain record class for things that need review, and then they can reclassify based on what it is. A records manager can also always manually classify something. So that would be one way. Reports would be another, but yeah, kind of an interesting use case. I like that.
Great. And the next one is, the bottom line for event-based retention that the trigger information needs to be added manually at some point?
The event, you create the event-based lifecycle, but then a specific event instance has to be created. So Shana gets terminated. I have to either create that event that says specifically Shana and, you know, how to identify her records, or I can have an external system create the event automatically. That type of integration can be done. So your, you know, your HR system, an ERP system can automatically create events if you need to. Because other examples might be an asset gets retired, a piece of property gets disposed of, right? Those are all good examples of event-based retention.
Great. And the next one is, do you have connectors for Salesforce and AWS S3?
We do not today. We've had clients ask about those, and so the how we develop connectors is kind of based on client demand and market demand. So AWS S3 and Salesforce have both come up. So it's you know, our SDK supports creating connectors as long as the target system has the APIs for us to connect to.
Great. And the next one is, do you have federal clients using Altitude? For those that don't know that, that's our other file analysis tool, in conjunction with Gimmal Records Management.
I don't think there's anybody in production using Altitude with Gimmal Records Management yet. They are integrated, so Gimmal Records Management can pick up altitude properties and use that. But I don't think there's anybody in production yet. We can follow up with you on that.
Great. Next one is, we have several systems that are essentially case management platforms and therefore not able to easily migrate the records to another platform. Does Gimmal support managed records in place?
We can. Again, it kind of goes back to, depends on what those systems are. If they are homegrown systems or if they are kind of older or niche systems, we can create custom connectors if we need to. But we can create custom connectors if we need to, into those systems if the APIs are there. Again, if they're commercial systems, it's just a matter of client demand.
We have just a couple more, so I think we can get through them. The next one is, can you schedule a review to handle the event-based retention?
Can you schedule a review to handle the event-based retention? Yeah, I mean, there would be, the reviews are kind of configured based on the record class. So if you had an event-based record class, when an event triggered the retention, that could, a very first step could be to trigger a review. So that would just be configured in the combination of the life cycles and the file plans.
Great. Let's see, one more in the chat. There is one asking if I should start looking for another job. No, because then Dean wouldn't have me to use as an example for
or
leaving the company.
You won the lottery.
Actually, yeah, might not be bad. And then, okay, so the last one we have here is, do you need an E5 license for this, or can you use E3 license?
You can absolutely use E3. So, Gimmal Records Management doesn't have a dependency on an E5 license. So we have clients that have E3 deployed, G3 deployed. I think in education, there's a different permutation of the license. I'm not a Microsoft license expert, but bottom line is it does not demand an E5.
Great. Well, that wraps up the Q&A. Dean, if you want to move to the next slide, if anybody has any more questions, you can contact us. Both of our email addresses were up on the previous slide, or you can send us an email at info@gimmal.com, or visit our website. It's right there up on the screen as well. And for those of you interested in the recording of this webinar, we will be sending out between 24 to 48 hours in the form of a thank you email. So keep an eye out for that if you want to see this presentation recorded.
And there was one question that just popped in. Is the Pro version that we presented available now? Yes, it is. So everything I showed today is release product from Gimmal.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.